Hello, welcome to the Better Ways podcast. I'm Tom,
I'm Jamie.
and I don't know what we're going to talk about today, Jamie. I know the match is still going. How are they doing?
No, that's just finished.
Oh,
So
it's just
Arsenal,
finished.
yeah, Arsenal won. So I'm very happy with that.
Oh,
So we'll,
fantastic.
we'll, we'll
That's a
take
good
it. We didn't
start.
play very well, but we'll take it. We'll take it. Yeah.
Excellent.
So unfortunately, we're not talking about the Arsenal game today. I wish we were, but sadly not. No, I think we decided that we were going to talk about the big government U-turn of the
Yeah,
past
yeah,
week.
yeah.
Since the Tory Party conference, I think it was, or just
Mhm.
before that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess two things. First of all, thing one, do you think in this particular case, what are your thoughts on it, really? But then secondly, what are your thoughts on government U-turns overall?
Ooh, big questions. I
Mm,
think this one doesn't surprise me.
mm,
Um, it's always a bit annoying, really, because I feel like the whole thing's a bit of a distraction. So in fact, I think Liz Truss has been incredibly lucky because what's happened is, first of all, she had the Queen dying,
mm.
and that effectively gave her 2 weeks of cover. I know she had to do things, but that gave her 2 weeks of no scrutiny to prepare what she was going to do.
Yeah.
Then we had the budget, that was botched. But everybody seemed to pick up on the tax cuts for the rich.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a huge distraction from the real concern, which was how little they were helping the poor,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and how much that is a problem, and it's a problem that's still not resolved.
Mm,
And in fact, maybe they're going backwards with the changes to universal credit and trying to
mm.
make, well, they've changed the threshold for job seekers allowance or universal credit, the replacement for that.
Is that the amount of hours they change
Yeah, yeah,
work,
they've
right?
done a change of hours so that uh, essentially, I think you end up having to attend more often, and
Mm,
it's also more difficult to avoid taking a job. And it's generally part of the agenda that I think they've got, which is a sort of way of looking at it, saying, well, there's all this unemployment,
mm,
um, but there's all these unfilled jobs.
mm.
So therefore, clearly the problem is people aren't taking the jobs; they're just sitting around on benefits. That's the mindset that they've got.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily true. There may be some of that. I'm not sure.
Agree.
But I think that's why they are trying to tighten up, make it harder for people to refuse work,
Mm,
and make people have to attend more often, justify not taking jobs.
mm.
And also, it links back to the £20 a week that was taken away, that was there over COVID. And the fact that I don't think universal credit has ever been funded properly, um,
Yeah.
not as it was intended to make work pay.
Mm,
Now,
mm.
Sunak did reduce the rate, so the marginal rate came down, which meant that as you start working, you lose your benefits more slowly. But
Yeah.
arguably, I think it's still 50 something percent tax. It's still, I think, much higher than it probably should be to encourage
Mm,
people to do some work.
mm.
So yeah, that's the sort of background of it. So I think what's happened is all this fuss about the 2 billion or so, which is related to the 45p rate, and everyone running around saying, "Oh my God, they're trying to reward rich people," which obviously is a concern and does look bad. But I think that has sort of taken the eye off the ball, which is, well, where the heck is the support at the bottom end?
Mm,
What are they doing to make it easier for the low paid to get into jobs? Where's the carrot? I'm only seeing a stick.
mm,
And so, in a way, I think this coverage has, maybe not. I don't think it's what they intended, but I
mm,
think it's maybe made a lot of the rest of the package not have much scrutiny.
mm.
Now,
Yeah.
they help people a bit with national insurance changes. They help people a bit with the freeze on the electricity and gas prices, the cap.
Mm,
But that doesn't help you very much if your rent's gone up and you can't, and you're choosing between paying the rent and putting food on the table.
yeah.
So yeah, they had to U-turn it really to keep their own party in order. But
Mm,
I don't. I still think, like, why are we only talking about that? And the
yeah.
bankers bonus thing, which, as I understand it, with the bankers bonuses, the bankers were getting the money anyway. They just couldn't get it in the form of a bonus, so it had to go in things that
Yeah.
were not
Salaries.
related. unrelated to performance, like salaries. Probably other things they do. And that just meant that the bankers weren't being paid according to performance, which is not great. And so the whole, limiting bank, because I mean, you can argue about whether bankers should get paid so much, etc. But you certainly would want some performance-related element there. So I think that is again a big distraction because, I mean, I hate the fact bankers get paid so much, but that sounds like a good thing to do to make their performance more aligned, pay more aligned with performance. But again, it gets all the headlines at the top end. So we're talking about, we're talking about rich people. They don't need us to talk about them. They don't need us to talk about them. They need, it's the poor people or the poorer people who need our attention and focus and what we should be pushing the government to focus on, I think.
Probably right. Well, yeah. It's definitely been a distraction. I know that's been the Tory party line, hasn't it? That's been they said that's the reason for getting rid of it. We listened. We listened to what you had to say. We changed our minds. And then a few of the ministers have come out and said it is exactly what you said. It's a distraction. Now it's interesting what you say because now the fact that this is gone, will it highlight exactly what you just said? Will it bring into the media's attention and to social media's attention and to our, into your living room, the fact that the poorest in society and people on middle incomes as well, of course, yes, the freeze on the energy prices is going to help, but ultimately we're still paying significantly more than what we were paying a year ago, considerably more than what we were paying 2 years ago. The average, obviously, rate of inflation is still really high, so the price of shopping and goods and everything is significantly higher. So have they, I guess my point is, unintentionally, did they create a fantastic smokescreen for themselves? Look at here, look at the 45p tax rate. Well, we do nothing. But now that's gone. We can all focus here and hold to account for that.
That's why I'm saying she's been really lucky. It may not look like it, and it's been a mess of having to climb down with her own party. But in terms of, not with her own party, but in terms of the wider scrutiny, I think she's been very lucky. She's had all these other things going along, distracting from where I think people should be concerned. And now that's been resolved, maybe we will have more on how people are struggling, and they are struggling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this because obviously I spend a lot of time on social media, particularly Twitter, which obviously is very left-wing, anyway, it's incredibly left-wing. But what you do tend to find is obviously it generates more. Oh, can you hear that? I think my fingers buzzed. I think Twitter is a place where people are very open and honest because they feel further removed from it than they do from Facebook or Insta, for example. So when you look at what the Twitter sphere is saying, it's very civil war type still between the different parts of society that are having to pop at each other. But there is a general consensus now from pretty much all sides that what's coming down the tunnels towards us at a significant pace is major hardship. For at least a year, I know I've looked at the predictions and they reckon that we'll be back into growth or pre-pandemic, where we were pre-pandemic, by 2024. So we've got a minimum of, what's that, just under 15 months.
Yeah, the best part of 18 months.
Probably. Yeah, probably before we're back to where we were. And it's, some people are looking at this and going, let it happen. Let the train wreck happen because it's needed to reset everything and rebuild it again. And I think that's a disastrous way of thinking. It always has done, always will do. And it's always the poorest that get hurt the most. And people in the middle, your homeowners. So broadly, when I look at this, the U-turn, I like it when the government U-turns. I do, because it does show that they are willing to listen to public pressure. That to me is really important. Yeah. The public isn't always right, but it's very rare that the public agree on anything. And what they do agree on, most people agree on, is that what's coming down the tunnel is going to be horrific, that the energy price cap maybe won't be quite enough to insulate everybody, and that more potentially has to be done. And this is where it gets dicey, because I don't know how many mortgages are coming off fixed rates in the next 12 to 15 months. I don't know how many, but we know interest rates are going to be pretty bad where they are, where they're going to be 2023 going into 2024 as well. So how many homeowners are going to be negative equity, have to sell, distressed foreclosures, all that type of stuff. And are the government going to have to step in again? Will they have to listen to the public? Because I think the days of us going back to the 80s, where people would just blindly let millions of people suffer and lose their homes and all the rest of it, those are Tory voters. Yeah, people who own a home and pay mortgages are much more likely to vote Tory. Let's just say it. That's what the facts state. So when it comes to U-turn, this car crash that's coming, are they going to have to U-turn again and go, you know what, we have to do something about interest rates. We have to do something to support homeowners and mortgage payers, because otherwise they'll be rioting on the streets. For me, I think U-turning government is a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's good that governments listen and can change their ways, and that's a good sign. But I think really this was about her listening to her own party, not the public. So we'll see. On the wider point, yeah, I mean, when in a post-COVID world, you know, we now have a situation where the government has gone through a period of paying people's wages with furlough, giving grants to businesses, and supporting the self-employed, all those different schemes that we had, which enabled people to survive the pandemic, which have cost hundreds of billions, which people now think, oh, well, we can actually do things like that, after previously being told that we could never afford to do anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's the landscape of it. Now we've got energy bills.
There's a magic money tree after all, Tom.
Yeah, there is a magic money tree. There always was. It was never. I mean, you know, we've had quantitative easing since 2008, which is literally printing money. It's just printing money and giving it to banks rather than printing money and giving it to ordinary people. So we've had that. Now we've had the cap on electricity and gas prices, which is another, you know, multi-tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions, government paying for your bills. So I think in this landscape, people will look at it and say, well, I can't afford to pay the mortgage increase. The government should be capping my mortgage or my rent, or the price of food in the shops. You know, maybe basic foodstuff should be capped.
Socialism by proxy, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Before you know it, you've got exactly that. You've got socialist price controls for all the goods, and moving towards a centrally planned economy with all the disadvantages of that. So
that's a disaster. Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. So I think much will depend on what happens in the next few months, and then it will be a question of whether or not they think they can win when the election comes. If they don't think they can win, they may stop listening just because it's irrelevant and do whatever they want to do in the meantime. If they do think they can win, they may well have to do some things to support people. But I think mortgages is a new one, you see. Now, I don't think this was caused by the budget. Mortgage rates have been rising. It's mainly led by what's happening in the US. Obviously, with all the printing of money and quantitative easing, eventually inflation was going to rise. The pandemic put that off a lot because we had a big shock to demand. And then we had demand for things at home, which led to the supply chain crisis. And eventually this has all fed through to higher inflation. And now the Fed is raising interest rates that really controls the price of, that we pay here, because we have to raise our interest rates in order for people to buy our debt, our bonds. And of course the Ukraine war has made investing, the euro and the pound and the yen have all dropped dramatically. The budget didn't help. It probably added 1% to the rates that people were paying. But we were always going to have this increase because, I mean, you and I remember interest rates being higher in the past, up as high as 15% back in the 90s. And so this was always going to be a problem. The trouble is, the change has come very dramatically, and the rates have become decoupled from the actual bank base rate, which I think is still 2.25%.
Yeah, that's right.
Now people are paying above 6. If they're trying to fix now for 5 years or so. So all of that has, it's caused a massive shock to bills, or will cause a massive shock to bills. I think it's several 100,000 people a week, or maybe it's a month, I'm not sure, probably a week, coming up to their end of their fixed rate and needing to change. So there'll be huge pressure to do something.
Yeah.
And it'll be hard to resist.
Just sorry to jump in, but just because it'll slip my mind. there was an interview that Liz trusted. I don't know when it might have been her BBC disaster round, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it might have been something else. But I just saw a clip of it today, and I meant to bring this up, so sorry for jumping in, but I just wanted
No, go for it.
to say that she was asked about this, about mortgages, and this is the new Tory party line. Obviously, you've got the anti-growth, you've got the anti-growth coalition, but then kept saying, which is a fact, it is a fact, and it's a lovely little sweep it over there. No, it's not my problem. She goes, interest rates are set by the Independent Bank of England.
That was not my job.
Exactly that. How long can you use that as a political shield before eventually public pressure goes?
Gas and electricity prices are set by the global market or the regional market in the case of gas. It's the same. I mean, the government doesn't set the price of domestic fuel, but they've still bailed it out. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think they can just keep borrowing and keep funding, and I think if they do, all it's going to do is cause huge debt problems in the future.
Just kick the can down the road, don't you?
Well, but also as the interest rates go up, as the Bank of England rates go up, which they have to, the cost of servicing the debt that we already have goes much higher. Well, a significant percentage of it is related is short-term rates, so it's tied to the rates that the Bank of England charge, and then we're just spending more and more of the pie on interest, and therefore we're borrowing more, which of course is then costing more. Now our debt's still lower than most G7 countries.
I saw that. I was surprised at that. Considering the panic in the market. It's like,
it's all down to Gordon Brown actually, because he paid down debt, I think, to 40% of GDP or something.
Did he really?
Yeah. Well, you remember Labour stuck to Tory spending commitments when they got in the first few years, and then they slowly increased what they were spending, but they also increased tax. So it was largely down to that, and it's obviously gone up a lot. It went up with the financial crisis, and then it went up again with COVID a lot.
97%, isn't it, currently?
Yeah, but most are over 100.
That's the thing. I always think.
I think Italians are 200.
I was going to say it is worrying because like you said, it's the servicing of the debt, isn't it? So it's not like, oh, don't worry about it, you pay it off someday. It's the current debt repayments keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That is a problem.
I mean, you can pay it back in the long term. So war debt was
just recently paid off.
Several 100%. So that was much higher. I don't know, 250, 300 more percent of GDP. And Lend-Lease from the US. And we didn't pay that off till the early 2000s completely. So it is possible to convert some of it to long-form debt that you pay down slowly. But generally, you need the cooperation either of investors or foreign governments for that. But so I don't know. But again, I think if they're not winning, if they don't think they can win in 2024 or whenever the election is, well, it has to be by December 2024, I guess. Then they will be less likely to be responsive. If they think they could win, they might find some way to do it. I mean, there's been loads of Tory stimulation of the housing market that have caused the prices to rise so high. So I think it's quite ironic that they are now experiencing this challenge, or we're all experiencing this challenge on their behalf, because they did things with the stamp duty. I mean, during COVID, they massively reduced that or suspended that. I can't remember the details, but they've done a whole series of interventions. They've just recently changed the thresholds in the budget, which it's good because it makes it easier for first-time buyers. But all it does is pump up prices at the low end. All of these short-term fixes are just causing the price to rise, temporarily making it easier for people, and then it gets more difficult later.
I've been going blue in the face still having these discussions with people online, and it's just, there's two in the last 2 days. Gen Z are really going to benefit from the coming house price crash. I keep going back to it all the time. I was like, they won't, because you can't afford a deposit now. You won't be able to afford one when the economy is on the ropes anyway. Secondly, even if house prices drop 15%, that takes us back to where we were pre-COVID. No one was having an easy ride getting on the property market pre-COVID anyway. And if you think that they can afford a deposit plus an extra £500 a month on top of what they would have paid 2 months ago on your monthly mortgage rate, no one benefits from this apart from very wealthy people or institutions who hoover up everything anyway, which is what they're doing in the US. You know, I think it's BlackRock, Vanguard, I think, are just hoovering up loads of properties for the buy to rent and build to rent market. There was something else I wanted to run by you, because this was, again, I don't want to go too far off topic. Obviously, this is about U-turns, but we always we it's how this thing should go anyway. And it's only, I've seen it in fits and spurts. And I read an article, I think it was yesterday, and it was diabolically written. So I could only assume it was translated from another language, because it was a bit like you read it and go, what the hell, that makes sense. But I've read a few different bits about it, and it was spurred by OPEC cutting their oil targets. And they said that the US might do this, introduce this bill called, I think it was NOPEC, right? NOPEC, and I don't know what the N stands for, but it's basically the idea of it was, how do you leverage the global economy in a way so it's not at the mercy of OPEC? But of course, they want to keep the petrodollar going and all that stuff. But tied in with this other article, apparently it was included in their Inflation Reduction Act, which they passed, I think, 6 weeks ago, however long it was.
Yeah, amusingly entitled IRA Act.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And apparently, in that there are certain I don't know what you call it, like, I don't know, moves, laws, rules, whatever you want to call it, where they believe it could lead to the re-industrialization of the US and the de-industrialization of Europe, because apparently it's to spur inward industrialization within the US, things like chips, very microchips, very sensitive areas that we were all reliant upon, but we've been too reliant upon basically quite unfriendly parts of the world for a long time. And they reckon the consequence of this could be that the US will see a load of businesses from Europe shift over there because they're making it very friendly. Europe's industrial economy sink even lower than it has done, which has been quite bad for a while anyway. So it's almost like, right, where... Again, these are the type of challenges that a forward-thinking UK government would go, you know what, we need to do something about this. Like targeted investment opportunities. Call it what you want, tax-free zones for certain industries.
So there's a few things they have. So first of all, before I get on to what we can do about it, so the IRA Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, you're exactly right, huge subsidies, especially for things like electric car batteries. So they are paying, I think, up to $48 per kilowatt hour, which electric car batteries are around $100 to $150 per kilowatt hour at the moment. So that could reduce the cost of a battery pack by about 30%. And a battery packs can cost 5 figures, so that's a big difference in the price of the car. But there are all sorts of credits that depend on whether you manufacture in the US, whether you source the materials, you mine and refine and do other things in the US. So it's very clever in that respect. Absolutely big incentives, absolutely a lot of things will move. And unless there's corresponding incentives in Europe, they'll suffer. On the NOPEC thing, so the idea was to form a buyer's cartel, because OPEC's a seller's cartel. And with a buyer's cartel, the idea was not to pay too much, so that you can stop the price rising too much by getting together with all the other countries who need to buy oil on the global market. And actually try and control the price from the other end. So that whether that will ever work, because it depends on countries getting together and not breaking away because they can get a better deal. I don't know. But that's the NOPEC thing that they're trying. They've also got the US Strategic Reserve, which is they're releasing.
Emptied that a bit now.
Well, they've emptied that a lot to try and get the gas prices down, as they call it in the US, the petrol prices, and it has some success, but eventually they'll have to refill it and they'll have to pay the current price then. So all of that's going on in the background, but you're right. What the really interesting thing, and the other bit of scrutiny that we haven't had yet, the missing 2/3 of the budget is all of this supply side reform, which has been talked about in the UK. So Liz Truss has talked a lot about we need to simplify regulation, remove bureaucracy, make things easy to invest in, encourage people, foreign companies and individuals to invest here. And that's what we're still waiting to hear a lot of the detail on, because that's much harder than just changing tax. That's the easy bit. And maybe she should have done the supply side first and the tax later, or at least brought them together, and then you wouldn't have had all the crash on the markets. But they have done a few things. So previously free ports were introduced. That was a Boris thing, and that's going ahead. But they've also got these new enterprise zones that they've announced, which will allow certain areas to reduce taxes locally, reduce business rates to zero, and have other incentives. But I think we need to do something much bigger because the size of the US package is enormous. It's trillions of dollars. But they have a huge advantage because everything's denominated in dollars, so they never face devaluation. So, so I'm hoping that what the government is going to announce is sensible, rapid, easy to deliver reforms that make a dramatic difference. But I'm not overly confident about that.
I hope you're right. I honestly, this is the thing. As you know, I may not have hidden this very much. I'm a little bit anti-Tory in my approach to life. I grew up in a Labour household. Tories are the enemy. Blah 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 blah. But I'm open-minded enough to go. I'll give everyone a chance. I'll listen to what they have to say. I think tribalism is a terrible thing because you can end up missing some amazing stuff. And anyway, the reason why I'm going to that is I want, obviously, what our government does. I want it to work. Ultimately, that's because I've got friends, I've got family, I have my own life, my own roof over my head. I've got to pay. I want a wealthy, successful, happy country. I think you're barking if you want something to deliberately fail. But I'm going to throw a bit of a surprise question at you because this is really interesting. So we're playing Guess the Future here, and I was on an interesting thread again on Twitter the other day, and it was talking about obviously the price of oil, or price of gas, whatever, and they said Russia obviously being very difficult and playing the markets very well, so we don't really want to work with them. So, but we might have no choice. So there goes. The other two places you can source significant amounts of oil from, Iran and Venezuela. So if this guy goes, it's going to be one of the three. It will be Russia, Iran, or Venezuela, where you see a massive thawing of US/Western relations with. Which one do you think it will be? I've got my guess. I was really going to guess it.
Oh, if I have to pick those three, I can't see it being Russia.
No, I don't think so.
I would think probably Venezuela.
That's where I thought as well.
I know the Democrats are trying to get the Iran deal back up.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we'll have a Republican at some point, whoever it is, whether it's Trump or DeSantis.
Oh, they'll win. They'll win the next election. Yeah,
and that would change. So I'd have to think Venezuela. But they're trying to pump more themselves. And they could limit. I mean, they could reduce demand. That's the other thing. With the switch to electric cars, if that's accelerated, that will reduce domestic demand. Quite a bit of it is domestic travel.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Venezuela, you're right. But I was speaking to a friend about this just in message format the other day, and he sent me the OPEC thing, and he was kind of taking the mick because he was going, "Oh my God, you must be in panic street because all these because I spend so much time reading and thinking about this stuff. It kind of dominates my world." And he was like, "God, you must be like living in a state of constant terror at the moment." I was like, "Nah, I've kind of become immune to it. I'm like that now, flatlined all the way through." Yeah. But I did say, I think OPEC. There's two schools of thought on this. The first school of thought is that OPEC actually they're not really cutting back because I can't think it's Peter Zahelan. I can't remember the guy who talks a lot about demographics and stuff. He was saying basically they're not able to produce their current targets. It's basically impossible. They don't have the infrastructure for it. So when we're asking them to produce more, it's impossible. So all they've done is bring their targets down to what they can actually deliver on. Yeah. Don't know if it's true, but if it is, fair enough. The second way of looking at this, and this is what I said to my friend, was I think they're being really, as in OPEC, I think they're being really short-sighted here. If they've cut it deliberately to keep demand and cost high.
They definitely have done that to keep the price up, yeah.
Right, because if they've done it that way, all they're doing is spurring on the West and a lot of the world to just transition even faster away from fossil fuels than we have now. Because eventually, already the US is starting to bare its economic teeth quite a lot, like the Inflation Reduction Act, And I think the UK will follow suit. I think Truss will do something similar. And I think you'll start to see a lot more protectionism kind of kick in now. And the EU certainly, and the US probably, unless a regressive Trumpian type gets in again, all they're going to do is put as much money into renewables as they can to wean us off it. If OPEC was smart, make oil as cheap as it possibly can be, because then you'll get Billy Bob on the high street in his four-wheeler pickup truck We don't need any of that green crap. Petrol's, it's ridiculously cheap. What are they doing wasting our money on that? And of course, the Trumpians would listen to it. So I think they've been a bit silly with this OPEC if they've done it, to keep prices artificially high.
Yeah, I'm sure they have done it for that reason. I think their philosophy is that they have a limited time window anyway, and they want to maximise the money they get. So a lot of those economies in the Gulf, they are trying to transition. You see that in different states at different times. And one of the transitions they've tried to do is towards tourism, which you see, particularly in Dubai.
Yeah.
But also other states. So holiday destinations, shopping destinations, tallest building in the world, that kind of stuff. Because they see that as a future economy. After the oil is gone. The Saudis haven't done that so much, but that's mainly because they've got so much oil. They've got a longer time horizon than some of the other states.
Don't they have a sovereign wealth fund as well? They just go
they put money away like Norway has. And so that is also for the future. But I think they've done a calculation that they want to pump a decent amount of oil at a high price rather than lots of oil at a low price and let it run out sooner. That's what they've decided to do, and they've got an idea in mind, and they like it to be $100 or above because they've seen that people will pay it, and so it's dropped back recently, much below that. So, but of course, we haven't seen it in the UK in the terms of what people pay at the pumps because the value of the pound has dropped.
And long-term
contracts. Again, the value of the pound did drop because of the budget, but it had also been dropping for months as the euro
the strength of the dollar,
as the yen had because of the strength of the dollar. Yes. So it recovered everything it dropped to the budget for a few days. So it's just I was so frustrated because all the media reports just showed a graph where it was
that little bit
$1, $1.12, $1.08.
Go back that way, and it's
you need the bottom to be zero, so you can actually see it in context. And this misleading stats are so common.
They love picking that little bit, don't they? That little bit of the graph. They do.
And there was a lot. I mean, it was significant, and it was a botched budget release and the communication, and but it was not the end of the world that people were painting it as. Now, if it keeps dropping, it will be a problem. But with the price going back up, of oil going back up, we will see increased pump prices here.
I did think that. I think that's a worry, isn't it? Again, because people can't afford it. They just can't afford it. Although, interesting, because we talk about this, I think on every one of these that we do, we always talk about, we branch out. And I think we spoke one of the previous ones about how actually the price of commodities has started falling quite significantly across the world. I saw a stat, I saw a graph, I think it was the other day, and they said that the cost of shipping, so shipping goods, has actually declined by 76% from its peak, which is the largest fall in shipping history, which is amazing because, again, eventually, if that comes down,
we have the largest rise.
Comes down. Yeah, exactly. Because of like you said, the blockages and supply chains and all that stuff. So
it's improving. It's improving.
Yeah. So you should see when that feeds through.
Yeah. So a few things have happened. I mean, obviously, the Chinese still have COVID lockdowns, but they're
getting better, aren't they?
Coping better with them. So they haven't abandoned the policy, but they've done things like just lock all the workers in the factory until they live there. So not great solutions for the people involved. But they've got better at keeping it going. Also, increasingly, other places are where the factories are. They're in India, they're in Vietnam, other parts of the world which are cheaper than China. And they're coming back. I mean, as you say, the US is investing in
onshoring a lot more.
Lots of onshoring the factories and stuff. So, so that will help. I think those prices will eventually feed through, but you're probably talking a couple of years before you see it in the shops.
That's a scary thought, isn't it? Like 24 months more of just rising prices, and I mean, to be fair,
prices did come down for decades. So food prices, for example, became half what they were 20 years before. So it is all relative, but there's no comfort if you can't afford your food.
That's exactly. And also, it is the fact that life has changed, hasn't it? I mean, again, like my dad and I always have the discussion about interest rates now versus interest rates in the 80s and 90s when they were sky high, how hard it was. And I always have to say to him that I'm not poo-pooing your struggles back then because they were legitimately terrifying. Like the they were shocking. But I saw a Sky News clip, and it was probably the best
Yeah.
explanation I'd seen with no complexity. It basically said, don't look at what interest rates are alone. You have to look at the mortgage burden.
Yes.
And it goes, the mortgage burden today is the highest, because even just the interest rates have had now, let alone the ones that are coming in, is the highest it's been since that point. I think it's the late 80s or whatever it was.
Yes,
And I
it
can't
is,
remember
yeah.
the percentage, but literally they were like that. It goes, so people are
Yeah.
suffering exactly the same as the people back at that time period were. We can't afford for them to go any further. So I don't know, Tom. It's like, what are the answers to any of this stuff? We keep talking about it, don't we? We keep going back to
Yeah.
the same all the time.
Well, we've talked already on houses, so build
yeah,
more.
build more. Yeah,
Because you've got
just not near me.
10
Just
million
not near
more
me.
10 million more people, and
Yeah.
like house building's not kept up for 40 years.
However long.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one problem. But yeah, I think the average multiplier is, or the average house is 7.5 times the average income. Now, it used to be about, the long-term average is 5.
Oh, I thought it was 3, wasn't it, back in the
No,
day?
well, it depends how far back. Back in the day, it
Yeah.
was as low as 3.
Yeah.
But the average over the last couple of decades or so is 5.
Yeah.
At the time when you had 15% interest rates, it probably was 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
The 6% now is equivalent to something like 9 or 10% then.
Yeah.
So
Frightening.
it can't go up any further. But yeah, ultimately with housing, you've got to focus on more houses being built, letting local authorities build social housing at a low rate, cheaply and economically, on a massive scale. And to do that, you've got to reform planning, so that you have permission to build that, and you don't have everywhere being a NIMBY area where people won't allow it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
agree.
you then got to get rid of all these distorting incentives that just pump the house prices up.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
Because they're all short-term fixes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let prices fall. But you see, the thing is, if they fall 15%, in order to get back to the 5 times multiple, they need to fall 30%.
Yeah.
So
And if they do that,
50% will help, but it won't.
but if they do that, the market
just
the market just collapses if you do that, though. Then suddenly,
if it goes as low as 30%, then it would.
Well, there was again something I read. I wish I'd kept the article aside, but I didn't. And it was talking about the stress tests that the banks had through post 2008, and obviously the stress tests were done. I didn't know this. I always thought, what do they do?
Yeah.
They do go in and get like bankers to flex their muscles and stuff like that. It's a stress test. So, but then in fact, what they do is what if the bank could handle X amount of people defaulting on their mortgages? I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's a good way of doing it. The interest rate they did it on, the modelling they used was something like 3%. So if the rates were into 3, how many people would default on their mortgages? What would be the subsequent loss to the banks if they absorb that loss? None of them, the stress tests were never designed to as high as 6, 7, whatever percent. That's a bit scary. So again, I think it will be one of those where, going back to what we spoke about at the start, will the Gov have to step in? What can they do? What are the answers?
I mean, thankfully, we don't have the CDOs that we had before in the financial crash, the collateralized debt obligations. So the banks don't bundle mortgages and leverage against them at a massive rate. So they should be less exposed than they used to be, and they have more capital.
But there's an awful lot of money in this world. There's several trillion held in offshore accounts, isn't there?
Yeah.
And eventually it's going to get to the point where, because public pressure will be so much and we need extra help, there will come a point where eventually governments start asking the question, right, this is a little bit unfair. How do we get access to that cash to spread it a bit more and help people a little bit more? I mean, have you got trillion trash stuck away somewhere, Tom? Because if you have, now you go and spend
not
it.
That I know of.
Speak to your partner.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, there's a huge problem with the ultra rich and international boundaries and the lack of any ability to tax globally. But I mean that is a problem that also involves democracy, because so Ireland has this 12.5% corporation tax rate, which the EU have been trying to get them to raise for a long
donkey's years, and they're literally the Irish like that.
Democratically, if the Irish decide not to, shouldn't that be their right?
Yeah.
And of course, the lowest rates are 0, and that's where the tax havens exist. We've got more tax havens than anybody.
We have the Crown dependencies, which are basically
they were turned. The interesting thing with those is they were turned into tax havens as a way of getting them to pay for themselves. Because back in the 60s, early 70s, we were paying more and more to support these places and not doing very well financially at home. And so the great wheeze was, okay, we'll let them be tax havens, then they'll be self-supporting, which we did. But now, as you say, it's the ability to transfer profits, to change your tax jurisdiction that ordinary people like you and me can't.
No.
That is so unfair. And if we did at least do our bit by stopping our dependent territories from doing that, then we would have to subsidise them, because economically they'd need another model, many of them, or they wouldn't be able to support themselves financially. So, and even if we did that, there'll be other tax havens the other countries have.
There's always someone to fill the gap. There's always someone.
I could see maybe in the long run, global agreement or enough important trading countries that you could achieve that. But it's a fundamental problem, and it's a fundamental issue with globalisation. One of the many drawbacks.
Yeah.
You make it that easy for people to do that and to live that lifestyle.
So
because going way back when, people couldn't move money like that. You couldn't take the currency out. And the marginal tax rates at the high end were much higher. We had 80-90% tax here.
That's bonkers, isn't it?
I mean, there were ways of avoiding it, but it was much harder. And I'm not saying that's the answer, to put tax back up, because people would just leave. I mean, the French tried that, and everybody moved to London.
Everybody left, didn't they? Yeah.
Belgium.
What's it? Is it called? Is it the Laffer Curve? Is that?
The Laffer Curve is that's the curve which says at a certain point, as you raise taxes, then you get to the total tax you take gets to a peak, and then as you keep increasing taxes,
it doesn't go up.
Because people change their behaviour, or they move the money abroad, so they find ways of avoiding it. Because the incentive's strong enough. But it's not being proved that that's what happened. I mean, this was the argument about when the 50p rate was dropped to 45p in the UK, the tax take went up. It increased. We got more total tax. Now, assuming that wasn't caused by any other change, which is not that simple to determine, that's an example of it. But it doesn't mean that always lowering taxes gives you more tax.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of people that dispute the Laffer Curve as being, they think it's oversimplistic, which it probably is.
So, final question for you. Again, before we kind of wrap it up, really. So, we started this on the whole topic of U-turns, with a very specific one in mind, and then we branched out a little bit more to talking about, what do we think of governments and should they U-turn in general? So, the final question about U-turns before we wrap it up is, we've covered a lot of things here. We've talked about a lot of the problems in the world and how we fix them and all the rest of it. A lot of those will require a massive shift in ideology from a conservative government. They don't like taxing. You spoke about how you tax fairly across the globe because of globalization, everything else. We talked about re-onshoring, if you like, re-onshoring industry and so on, green technologies, transitioning away. A lot of these things are very against the conservative mindset. Do you think that in the 2 years that are remaining before the general election, our government has the ability to U-turn on its ideology enough to put some form of progressive strategy in place that will enrich the country in the future?
Well, as I say, I hope we're going to see this on the supply side, because I think you can do a lot with bureaucracy and regulation, and they could do more for incentives for investment and business growth. They could certainly do a lot more for small business people. And it's really bizarre how they've been quite anti-small business in general.
I agree. And sole traders and so on.
Conservative. So I'm more hopeful on those areas. I don't think they can solve the global tax problem. And I don't think the global tax problem is about getting rich people to pay more tax than the current rates they have in the UK. It's the fact that they're currently paying no tax or tiny rates. So it's just bringing them up to a comparable level. But we need to remember that the rich, the top 10% pay whatever it is,
70% of tax or whatever it is.
So it's not that they don't proportionately contribute. It's the super rich above them. It's where the billions and billions, the billionaires are. Those are the ones who are not paying any tax in the UK.
What was it the
corporate taxes?
the lady in New York said, I can't remember, there was a big case, wasn't it? A big trial. And she came out with that immortal phrase, only the little people pay taxes.
Yes.
I was like, oh, I'm one of those little people, I'm afraid. Yeah.
So I don't know. They whether they'll do. I think we've seen most of what they want to do on tax. But again, we're seeing what Liz Truss wants to do with tax. It's not clear to me that the Conservative Party are behind it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it hasn't felt like a Conservative Party for years. It's felt like some weird mix.
I agree with that.
And I'm no fan, absolutely. But I'm no fan of Labour either. Or the Liberal Dems, or the Greens.
Yeah.
So there isn't really a party that represents me. Everybody's got some good ideas, but I do want whoever's in to be successful. So
absolutely,
I hope some positive changes.
I agree, 100%. So let's hope they keep you turning.
Absolutely. Right. Well, good talking to you, Jamie.
You too, indeed. Yeah, absolutely, Tom.
Until next time.
See you soon. Take care.
Cheerio.
Bye.